The research that Dr. Conrad and I collaborated on, which is discussed in detail in our book, The Politics of Denial, examines the consequences of physical punishment both for the individual and for society, and really attempts to sort of answer the question, where does this rage go? We were interested in a paradox in U.S. political culture, that there is an extensive amount of research that documents that prevention is tremendously effective in dealing with a wide range of problems, with drug abuse, with recidivism, with a whole range of different problems. But when you look at the public policy solutions, the agenda is dominated primarily by punitiveness. And we began to wonder why this is, and suspected that in fact it was the case that there were this punitiveness in a public policy arena had its links to childhood experiences and punitive experiences in childhood of harsh punishment. So we first conducted a study of college undergraduates where we asked them their childhood punishment experiences and asked them to express their opinions on a range of different punitive public policy issues, their support for the death penalty, how widely should it be used, restrictions on abortion, to what extent would they endorse the use of military force if U.S. interests are threatened. And we found that there was a significant relationship between high levels of punishment and support for punitive public policies, but it was a complex relationship because it interacted with two different variables. It interacted with gender, so this effect was stronger for males than for females, and that it also interacted with therapy. And this was a very important variable because Alice Miller has argued that it's not the physical punishment alone that produces the punitiveness in adulthood, but it is the denial of the emotional consequences of that punishment that then can lead to this rage that can be carried from childhood and displaced onto adult political attitudes. And so we also measured whether individuals had had psychotherapy or not. And so it turned out that males without psychotherapy were more politically conservative or supported punitive public policies more. And then we replicated this finding with a community sample where we did a telephone survey of a probability sample of people living in eastern Massachusetts, and we replicated the identical results, that experiences of harsh punishment predicted support for punitive public policies, but again interacting. It was a complex relationship, that it was particularly males, particularly who tended to be higher in denial with no experiences of psychotherapy, who tended to be much more strongly in support of the death penalty, in support of the use of military force. Now in this second study, we embedded an experimental manipulation in the study, that half of the respondents in the survey were asked about their support for the death penalty first. That was the control group. The experimental group, we asked their childhood punishment experiences first, suspecting that that would activate the emotion associated with that childhood punishment, particularly for individuals who were high in childhood punishment. Then later they were asked about their support for the death penalty. We found that individuals who recalled their childhood punishment first, right, and then had an opportunity to sort of release that emotion with a projective test, which research has shown tends to have some sort of catharsis effect of emotional release in a short-term way, that individuals who recalled their childhood punishment first were significantly lower in their support for the death penalty than individuals who simply were asked about their support for the death penalty without recalling their childhood experience. And this really indicated that there is a strong emotional association with these childhood punishment experiences, which is in fact providing some kind of foundation for support for punitive public policies. Now, we've replicated these studies in these results in 2 subsequent studies, one particularly using the measure of the authoritarian personality, which Dr. Conrad talked about earlier. And in that study, in this most recent study, we had subjects answer a series of psychological or emotional tests as well. We had them express, or we gave them a measure of how angry they tended to be in general. And we found that anger was a significant predictor of authoritarianism, just as childhood punishment and gender and experience with therapy were as well.
Now, we know from 3,000 or 5,000 years of history from probably Samaria on that even this kind of thinking pervades a culture. And at the cultural level, at the societal level, it's the thinking of totalitarians who say, you better do the right thing or I'm going to punish you. And what does history tell us? Eventually, people rebel. And societies which think they were so secure and leaders who think they're so secure in totalitarian governments eventually fall. And the same thing happens in homes, that the parent eventually isn't strong enough and big enough to hit the kid.
The same argument we see when we talk about governments. There have been nations that have said we must have strong authoritarian governments to control the people. We know better what's best for them and so on. Nazi Germany was the worst example of that, but there are many other countries who still believe that the leaders of the country know more and they're brighter and they should have more influence over the citizens. There's a wonderful quotation from a historian, C.P. Snow, which I'll read briefly. The Nazi extermination of European Jews is an extreme example of a hideous and immoral crime carried out by thousands of German soldiers in the name of obedience to their superiors. And Snow says, when you think of the long and gloomy history of man, you will find more hideous crimes have been committed in the name of obedience than have ever been committed in the name of rebellion.